It began with a press conference. Flashing cameras. Nervous men in tailored suits. And a single sheet of paper laid out on the podium, the kind of document that changes the trajectory of lives. An unnamed investor steps forward. His jaw tight. Voice trembling. He clears his throat and stares into the wall of microphones. "We were promised an airport," he says. Silence falls over the room. Then the cameras start clicking again. But there is no airport. Cut to a satellite image, a barren strip of land outside the capital city. No hangars. No runway. Not even a single foundation slab. Just weeds, wind, and empty sky. The promise was supposed to be revolutionary, a multi-billion-dollar air transport hub to connect trade between Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. It would bring in jobs, shift economies, change maps. An entire region's future banked on the dream. But it was all a lie. $242 million. Gone. No concrete. No towers. No blueprints. Not even a permit. And the man behind it? Vanished. No trace. No forwarding address. No arrest. Just whispers, stories told behind closed doors. The press called him the Phantom of the Runway. The tabloids dubbed him the man who sold the sky. Authorities could not explain how he pulled it off. There were signed contracts, sealed deals, board meetings, and fake inspection photos. There were even ceremonial groundbreakings, complete with golden shovels and red ribbons. And yet, not one brick ever hit the ground. The fraud was so bold, so precise, so convincing, that seasoned bankers, government officials, and tech billionaires all fell for it. Who was he? A businessman? A visionary? A pathological liar? Or something even more dangerous? That question remains. Because before the scam broke wide open, before headlines exploded and panic set in, before prosecutors started hunting a ghost, one man had already slipped through the cracks of the global finance system, laughing all the way into history. And this is not the story of a failed con. This is the story of a man who succeeded. He sold an illusion. He cashed in on trust. He took hundreds of millions. For a dream that never existed. But how? That is what we are here to uncover. Because when you trace the steps, from the first fake blueprint to the final wire transfer, you do not just reveal a criminal. You reveal a mirror. A reflection of everything people want to believe. Prestige. Power. Legacy. Profit. He gave them hope in exchange for blind faith. And then, when the moment was right, he disappeared. So buckle in. This is not fiction. This is the untold story of the greatest con you have never heard of. And it starts with a runway that never was. Before the scandal. Before the headlines. Before he became a phantom with a $242 million price tag. He was just a man with a story. His name, at least the one on the passport, was Julian Mercer. To some, he was a visionary. To others, a charming liar. To investigators? A man who never existed. Julian's early years are a fog. His official biography, the one printed in press releases and business journals, painted a picture of a global entrepreneur with deep aviation experience. Educated at the London School of Economics. Former director at a Middle Eastern infrastructure firm. Advisor to multiple international governments. None of it was true. But no one checked. That was his gift, not lying, but presenting the lie with such confidence, such polish, that people never thought to question it. His first known appearance in the financial world came in 2013, at a trade summit in Dubai. Julian was seen networking with investors, pitching energy projects, talking casually about Gulf logistics and sovereign fund contacts. There were no actual deals. Just conversations. Just proximity. And that was enough. He understood early that most people do not need proof. They need presence. The right suit. The right smile. The right keywords. He gave them all. By 2015, he was showing up at conferences across Europe, Milan, Frankfurt, Vienna, pitching what he called Aerotropoly, a futuristic concept combining commercial aviation, cargo logistics, and digital connectivity into a new form of global trade infrastructure. It sounded revolutionary. It also sounded familiar, because he had lifted parts of it directly from a decommissioned EU proposal. But it did not matter. He spoke fast, laughed easily, and made you feel like you were in on something enormous. He always carried a custom carbon fiber business card. One side engraved with his name. The other, a QR code that linked to a slick website with animated mock-ups of terminals and private lounges. Julian was building the future of flight. Or so it seemed. Behind closed doors, he was different. Relentlessly calculated. He rehearsed investor meetings for days, memorizing details about his audience, their previous deals, their political affiliations, even the schools their children attended. He built psychological profiles. Not to manipulate, but to customize the illusion. If he pitched a royal family member, he used prestige. If it was a tech entrepreneur, he talked innovation. For bankers, it was returns. For governments, he used language like national advancement, geopolitical opportunity, and post-pandemic recovery. Everyone saw something different. But all of them saw what they wanted. And when they signed, he celebrated alone. Quiet. Focused. Julian did not drink. He did not gamble. He did not post on social media. He left no fingerprints, no selfies, no trace. Even his email accounts were routed through encrypted offshore servers. Phone calls? Burner numbers. Contracts? Digitally signed using IP masked addresses. Bank accounts? Held in Luxembourg shell companies linked to Panamanian holding firms. This was not just a con. This was a system. And no one knew where it started. Or where it would end. In 2016, he founded Astroport Development Group. It had no physical headquarters, just a website, a digital receptionist, and a Luxembourg P.O. box. Yet it was listed as the principal stakeholder for a $2.4 billion airport development outside Istanbul. There was no airport. Just a plot of state-owned land that he claimed had already been secured via a public-private memorandum of understanding. When journalists tried to verify it, government spokespeople shrugged it off. That's not our department. That's classified. We'll get back to you. No one ever did. Because Julian used bureaucracy as a weapon. He knew how slowly large systems moved, how easily information was lost between ministries, how lazily documents were cross-checked. A delay wasn't a red flag. It was proof that things were moving through the system. And if something went wrong? He pivoted. Blamed a regime change. Said the ministry was reshuffled. Claimed a signed agreement had been paused for strategic review. But always, the money kept coming in. From real investors. With real bank transfers. Julian's brilliance was that he never asked for money directly. He offered early consortium access, allowing investors to reserve a percentage stake in future terminal leases. He never said give me money, he said here's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. You were not investing in an airport. You were buying into a vision. And no one wanted to be the one who missed it. By 2018, Julian Mercer had raised nearly $140 million. And not one piece of concrete had been laid. Not one government officially confirmed the deal. Not one investor asked for a refund. Because the illusion still held. Until it didn't. By early 2019, Julian Mercer was not just building imaginary airports, he was constructing empires made of belief. At this point, his operations had expanded into 3 continents. Investors from Hong Kong, Riyadh, and Zurich were all on board. These were not unsophisticated players, they were hedge funds, private equity firms, even former intelligence officials. And yet, not one could see through the mirage. Why? Because Julian never sold them an airport. He sold them exclusivity. The feeling of being chosen. Meetings were invite-only. Emails were encrypted. Contracts had language like proprietary and limited tranche. He invented scarcity. And with that came urgency. If you don't move now, we have other partners lined up. No one wanted to be left behind. But behind the scenes, Julian's empire was paper thin. His company, Astroport, had fewer than 4 full-time staff. His global offices were virtual workspaces hosted by third-party providers. His chief architect? A freelance designer from Serbia he had hired on a gig platform. The airport blueprints? AI-generated mock-ups. The board of directors? Entirely fictitious. He had even created LinkedIn profiles using stolen headshots and fake credentials, then cross-endorsed them to create a network of false credibility. Everything was curated. Nothing was real. But the illusion was so polished that even global consulting firms were fooled. A prominent due diligence firm reviewed Astroport and gave it a favorable report, based largely on executive interviews that Julian had fabricated. He gave each fake persona a distinct voice, writing style, and backstory. Then, he scheduled all meetings over encrypted Zoom links. If someone ever insisted on in-person verification, Julian made himself unavailable. Government travel, quarantine restrictions, national security clearance. And people believed him, because they wanted to. It is easier to believe in greatness than to confront your own gullibility. Still, the bigger the lie, the more energy it takes to sustain. And by late 2019, cracks began to form. A German media outlet published an exposé, raising questions about Astroport's supposed Istanbul terminal. The article noted the land was already under a separate long-term lease to a Turkish cargo company. They had never heard of Julian Mercer. In response, Julian released a 22-page statement filled with legal threats, technical jargon, and vague references to disinformation campaigns launched by geopolitical adversaries. It worked, for a while. Investors stayed silent, waiting for the storm to pass. And then, COVID-19 hit. Air travel collapsed. Borders closed. Governments froze infrastructure funding. But rather than retreat, Julian adapted. He launched Astra Sky Logistics, a new initiative for post-pandemic cargo resilience. He said the world's airports would never recover. The future, he claimed, was in automated aerial logistics hubs, drone-operated terminals that could bypass outdated customs bottlenecks. It sounded crazy. It also sounded like the future. He raised another $60 million. Now, the money was no longer just coming from investors, it was flowing in through government recovery grants, innovation incubators, and emergency funds earmarked for pandemic resilience. He claimed partnerships with aerospace firms. Claimed prototypes were under development in a Norwegian facility. Claimed testing had already begun. The Norwegian lab? Non-existent. The prototypes? Computer renders. The partners? Fake shell companies with real-sounding names. Still, no one checked. Because the world was in chaos, and chaos favors the bold. Julian used that chaos to expand faster than ever. He spoke on virtual panels alongside real officials. He hosted digital summits with hand-picked moderators. He began offering paid keynote appearances to major think tanks. Suddenly, he was not a man on the run, he was a thought leader. It reached absurd heights. In 2021, Julian was nominated for a European Innovation Award. The nomination came from a subsidiary of a firm he secretly controlled. But the committee didn't know that. They saw the nomination, saw his network, and assumed he was legitimate. Even when the nomination was rescinded, the media didn't notice. Because Julian had already moved on. His final pitch was the most ambitious yet. He claimed Astroport had secured clearance to build the first international air terminal without a nation-state, a floating platform that would operate in international waters, sidestepping traditional customs, taxes, and regulations. Investors called it visionary. One analyst said it was like the Dubai of the ocean. It was, in reality, the crescendo of a perfect lie. He raised $42 million in less than 60 days. It pushed his total to just over $242 million. And then, he disappeared. No press release. No farewell statement. Just silence. For over 6 years, Julian Mercer had engineered a fantasy so intricate, so convincing, that it turned unreality into capital. But as with every masterpiece of deception, the end came not with a bang, but with a breadcrumb. It began in late 2021, when a junior analyst at a London-based due diligence firm flagged a small irregularity. She had been cross-checking Astroport's customs partnership agreement supposedly signed with the Port Authority of Singapore. The logo on the document was outdated, last used in 2013. Odd. She dug deeper. The email domain in the letterhead was not official. Even odder. The document had been signed by a man named Dr. Theo Jin, listed as head of port strategy. Except the Port Authority of Singapore had no record of any such employee. They never had. The analyst wrote a report. Her boss didn't act on it. But the report was picked up during a compliance audit of a sovereign wealth fund in Abu Dhabi, one of Julian's most recent investors. The audit team escalated the report. Within days, red flags began to multiply. Multiple board members across Astroport subsidiaries had conflicting birth dates, education records, and employment histories. Several had no verifiable existence outside of company-owned web domains and LinkedIn pages created on the same day. Still, that might not have mattered, until one discovery changed everything. One of the independent contractors hired to build the Astra Sky drone logistics interface had recently sued Astroport in a California small claims court over unpaid wages. In his affidavit, he revealed that he was given only vague design instructions, no access to any operational data, and that his point of contact constantly changed aliases. He realized he was designing UI for something that did not exist. He called it a ghost project. This affidavit, publicly available, caught the attention of an investigative journalist at the Financial Herald. The journalist, Lily Kwan, had covered corporate fraud before. She knew what to look for. She launched a 6-month investigation. What she found shocked even seasoned investigators. Julian Mercer's real name was not Julian Mercer. His birth name was Jonathan Mark Rowan. Born in 1985 in Scranton, Pennsylvania. Expelled from college in his second year for identity fraud. Arrested twice in his 20s for impersonating a venture capitalist. He had spent 5 years living in Europe under a rotation of forged passports and rebranded identities. He was not a visionary founder. He was a career con man with a PhD in illusion. Lily's expose hit front pages in March 2022. The Ghost Terminal, how a $242 million airport never existed. Within 72 hours, Astroport's website vanished. All associated domains were taken offline. Company emails bounced. Phone lines disconnected. Julian was gone. Interpol issued a red notice. Multiple governments launched inquiries. Investors scrambled to find where their money had gone. But there was no bank account to seize. No physical asset to reclaim. Nothing. Julian had siphoned the money across a labyrinth of offshore shell companies, crypto wallets, and prepaid international debit cards. He left no digital fingerprint unplanned. Every month, he had converted a portion of the investments into physical assets, rare watches, vintage wine, high-value stamps, and gold coins, all small enough to carry, hard enough to trace. Security footage later showed him boarding a private yacht from a Croatian marina just weeks before the expose dropped. Then, silence. It was as if the ocean swallowed him whole. Authorities chased dozens of leads. He was spotted in Cyprus. Then in Uruguay. Then in Morocco. All false alarms. Julian had disappeared into legend. But the damage remained. Astroport's collapse triggered ripple effects through markets that had staked real capital on vapor. One hedge fund lost $80 million. A German pension fund went under. The Emirati government launched a task force dedicated to fraud-proofing innovation grants. And the people behind the curtain, the ones who had validated Julian, suffered humiliating consequences. Due diligence firms were sued. Regulatory officers resigned. Think tanks purged their archives. But amidst the chaos, a larger question emerged: how did so many smart people fall for something so spectacularly false? The answer was not just Julian's brilliance, it was the system's vulnerability. We reward confidence over caution. We prioritize momentum over method. And we rarely question what dazzles us. Julian did not exploit a loophole. He exploited belief itself. The fall of Astroport was not just the collapse of a phantom company. It was a mirror held up to the modern financial world. It asked a brutal question: what is real, when perception is more valuable than proof? In the weeks following the scandal, financial commentators called Julian Mercer the greatest con artist of the 21st century. But that title felt too simple. Too easy. Too clean. Julian was not just a con man. He was a creator of belief. And belief, in the age of hype-driven capital, had become a currency more powerful than truth. When Lily Kwan's story went viral, the public devoured it like fiction. Twitter threads dissected Julian's fake boardroom photos. TikToks reenacted his investor pitch. Reddit communities began building timelines of his aliases, tracking passport stamps, scouring yacht logs. Julian became myth. Some painted him as a villain. Others, a genius. To many, he was both. Netflix greenlit a docuseries. Book publishers fought over rights. A film adaptation was optioned within 4 months. The man who disappeared with $242 million had, in his absence, become a cultural icon. And yet, there was something darker in the public fascination. Julian had not merely fooled institutions. He had exposed their fragility. Consider this: 27 due diligence reports were filed on Astroport. Only 2 noted inconsistencies. Neither were acted upon. 3 governments granted Julian honorary innovation visas. None verified his academic records. 11 major investors signed NDAs that waived site inspections. Not one ever saw the airport they were investing in. Julian never needed to hide the truth. He simply buried it beneath what people wanted to believe. He understood something fundamental: in a world where technology moves faster than scrutiny, a well-dressed lie can outpace any truth. Even after the fallout, many of his victims refused to press charges. Why? Because to do so would be to admit they were conned. And in the elite corridors of power, reputation is worth more than retribution. Some fund managers rebranded. Some governments quietly erased their Astroport press releases. And some just moved on, searching for the next big disruption. But a few learned. Lily Kwan was invited to speak before the European Parliament. Her warning was simple: the future will be built by dreamers. But if we do not vet our dreams, we will fund our nightmares. Governments began rolling out stricter audit protocols for international startups. Venture capital firms hired ex-intelligence agents as compliance officers. AI tools were developed to detect synthetic credibility fake resumes, coordinated online personas, falsified metadata. And still, the world remained vulnerable. Because Julian Mercer wasn't the only one. In the shadows of the tech world, others watched his rise, and his vanishing, with envy. Copycats began to emerge. Smaller. Sloppier. But inspired. A blockchain energy startup in Brazil raised $8 million with fake patents. A biotech firm in Sweden forged clinical trial data to secure EU grants. A climate tech company in Dubai claimed to develop atmospheric harvesters based on AI, but had no labs, no staff, and no tech. All of them traced back to the same playbook: sell the illusion. Skip the scrutiny. Run before the spotlight hits. Julian Mercer had not just committed fraud. He had pioneered a methodology. A template. And even now, no one knows where he is. Interpol continues to receive tips, some credible, most not. A man resembling Julian was allegedly seen at a luxury watch auction in Geneva. Another report claimed he boarded a cruise in the South Pacific using a Panamanian ID. A drone video posted online showed a figure matching his profile hiking alone in northern Patagonia. Each time, authorities chase the lead. Each time, he slips through their fingers. But maybe that is the final chapter of his genius. Julian did not vanish. He engineered his disappearance. He seeded decoys. Planted rumors. Wrote the myth in real time. Today, investigators believe that Julian likely underwent reconstructive surgery. That he liquidated most of his assets by mid-2022. That he may be living under a new identity in a country without extradition. If he is alive, he is watching. If he is dead, the legend lives louder than the man ever could. And as the world moves forward, one truth remains undeniable: we funded a dream. We ignored the wake-up call. And now, we live in the echo. What separates a petty scammer from a global con artist? What turns a simple lie into a $242 million illusion? The answer lies in architecture. Not of buildings, but of belief systems. Julian Mercer did not improvise his con. He engineered it, brick by brick. And when investigators finally pieced together his operation, what they found was not a man taking chances, but a man executing a blueprint. Step 1, the phantom resumed. Julian's career began on paper. He crafted a resume so extraordinary, it was almost unbelievable. But that was the trick: it had just enough credibility to be plausible. Bachelor's degree in aerospace logistics from MIT, no such program existed. A brief stint at NASA, his name never appeared in any records. An advisory role at Airbus, he once took a tour of the facility, nothing more. Honorary consultant to the UAE Ministry of Transport, entirely fabricated. He created a digital trail, LinkedIn profiles, alumni mentions, online interviews, all carefully curated. Julian understood that credibility online is not built on fact. It is built on pattern recognition. The more consistent the lie, the more people assume it is true. Step 2, The Trojan company Astroport Holdings Incorporated registered in Singapore. Mailing address in London. Board members? Dead men. Auditor? A dissolved firm in the Isle of Man. But the name sounded real. The documents looked polished. The website? Stunning, complete with drone footage of a fake airstrip in the Bahamas, licensed from a stock footage company in Miami. Even employees believed Astroport was real. Most were freelancers hired for remote tasks, presentation design, customer support, investor coordination. They never met Julian in person. They worked in silos. He kept each part of the machine isolated, like compartments in a submarine. No one saw the full picture. Except him. Step 3, the momentum trap. Julian mastered a psychological phenomenon known as escalation of commitment. Once investors put in money, even small amounts, they were more likely to invest again, simply to protect their previous decisions. Julian's strategy? Ask for $250,000 as a strategic seed round. Show phantom progress, renderings, press mentions, NDA-protected partnerships. Then ask for $5 million to secure land rights. Then $30 million to break ground. Then $100 million to accelerate construction and meet geopolitical deadlines. Each round was framed as urgent, limited, exclusive. And every investor believed they were in on something special, until they were in too deep to back out. Step 4, the proof illusion. The brilliance of Julian's operation was not in avoiding scrutiny. It was in managing it. He offered due diligence reports, written by a shell firm he secretly controlled. He coordinated Zoom calls with senior advisors, actors with LinkedIn profiles, wearing suits, reading from scripts. He faked satellite imagery of construction zones. Hired sound engineers to create background airport noise in video updates. One investor even received a live walkthrough of a terminal, only to later discover it was a 3D simulation rendered in Unreal Engine. To most, it looked like innovation. In truth, it was theater. Julian blurred the line between future vision and current reality. And in the venture world, where optimism often outweighs oversight, no one wanted to ask the wrong question. Step 5, the vanishing act. In late 2022, Julian began his exit. He dissolved 3 of his shell companies. Transferred millions into Monero and Zcash wallets. Flew to Montenegro, then vanished. He left no forwarding address. No real-time alerts. No traceable trails. Investigators believe his withdrawal was timed to media cycles. As newsrooms shifted attention to political unrest and crypto crashes, Julian quietly stepped out of the spotlight. He ghosted the world. And the world barely noticed, until it was too late. Underscore the genius behind the madness. Julian Mercer did not just manipulate people. He manipulated systems. He understood how bureaucracy lags behind innovation. How regulators operate in silos. How investors chase trends rather than truth. And how, in an age of digital saturation, confidence can outperform competence. Even now, universities teach Julian's scam and ethics courses. Some call him a villain. Others, a cautionary tale. But in dark corners of the internet, he is studied as a tactician. Reddit forums post breakdowns of his strategy. Substacks analyze his psychological manipulation. Disgraced CEOs whisper his name like a twisted badge of admiration. He built an empire on vapor. Sold thin air wrapped in buzzwords. And left the world questioning itself. Who do we trust? What is real? And why do we keep falling for the same kind of dreamer? Julian did not invent the con. He simply modernized it. And unless systems evolve, there will be others, smarter, faster, better funded. Because as long as ambition outpaces accountability, there will always be another Julian waiting in the wings. In the days following Julian Mercer's disappearance, confusion turned to panic. Then panic gave way to fury. And finally, silence. It began with unanswered emails. Then bounced wire transfers. Then, law firms started circling. But by the time anyone fully realized what had happened, the man who built an empire on an invisible runway had already flown far beyond their reach. The collapse. Astroport Holdings shut down its servers on a Friday morning. Employees woke to blank dashboards. Phone numbers disconnected. The London address? Emptied overnight. The supposed Bahamas site? Nothing but unpaved coastal brush. In a single day, over 37 high-profile investors had lost more than $200 million in total, plus unreported funds from private partnerships and institutional loans. Among the victims, a former U.S. senator with deep ties to aviation lobbying. A Gulf-based infrastructure fund that had pledged over $60 million. Two major tech billionaires who had invested under pseudonyms to keep their names off public records. A pension trust serving over 4,000 retirees from a Midwest manufacturing union. In total, over 76 entities, both individuals and institutions, were affected. And yet, no one could file a clean lawsuit, because nothing legally existed. Julian had never signed contracts in his real name. Astroport was a ghost company. Funds had been routed through so many offshore layers that even top financial forensic teams admitted defeat. He had, quite literally, stolen dreams, and left no fingerprints behind. The global hunt begins. Interpol issued a red notice. FBI Financial Crimes Division launched a task force. The Singaporean government opened an investigation into Julian's business registration trail. But every jurisdiction hit the same wall. No physical evidence. No jurisdictional clarity. No direct victims who could prove deliberate intent. Julian hadn't forged documents, he'd designed real ones with fake origins. He hadn't lied directly, he'd structured everything so others told the lies for him. Even the authorities, at first, struggled to define the crime. Was it fraud? Money laundering? Wire manipulation? Or simply a performance art piece taken too far? Private security firms were hired to track him down. A bounty of $5 million was quietly offered by a consortium of investors. But years passed. And no trace of Julian emerged. Rumors swirled. Some said he underwent facial reconstruction surgery in Venezuela. Others believed he retired in Laos under a fake identity. A few even theorized that Julian was never one person, but a coordinated group posing as one mastermind. The truth? No one knows. And perhaps, that is Julian's final trick, becoming a ghost so compelling, the world keeps chasing his shadow. The fallout. Julian's story sparked outrage. Then fascination. Then something more disturbing, emulation. Within 2 years, there was a 40% spike in visionary fraud schemes across Southeast Asia and the Middle East. Startups claimed billion-dollar contracts with fake governments. 3D renderings of imaginary rail systems fooled real banks. The Julian Mercer playbook became required reading, not in boardrooms, but in underground entrepreneur forums. A Netflix series was greenlit. A best-selling book titled The Sky That Was Never There sold out within weeks. TED Talks unpacked his psychology. The term Mercering was coined in Silicon Valley slang, meaning, to pitch a dream so big, no one dares to question it. And amid the cultural wave, one question persisted. Was Julian Mercer a genius con artist, or simply a mirror to our collective greed? The human cost behind every headline was a victim. A young engineer who quit Boeing to join Astroport's R&D division. A single mother in Dubai who invested her life savings hoping for generational wealth. A veteran diplomat who vouched for Julian and lost his career. And yet, none of them could fully explain what happened. Because Julian had not just deceived people, he had enchanted them. Even those who lost millions admitted, he made us believe in something. For a moment, we were part of something revolutionary. That may be the darkest part of the story. Not the money. Not the lies. But the beauty of the illusion. He sold hope. Then disappeared with the currency of trust. The system that allowed it. Julian's operation thrived in a world where oversight was fragmented. Background checks were automated. And charisma often replaced accountability. He knew that a well-designed deck could bypass months of legal scrutiny. He knew that regulators couldn't coordinate across borders fast enough. He knew that in the venture capital world, the fear of missing out was more powerful than due diligence. And he weaponized it all. Governments have since tightened shell company laws. Offshore banking regulations are evolving. VC firms now employ ex-intelligence officers for investor vetting. But even now, none of those changes would have caught Julian, because he was never where they expected him to be. He didn't break the rules. He built a new game around them. Legend lives on today. Julian Mercer is more myth than man. He is a case study. A ghost story. A viral thread on Reddit that refuses to die. Some say he was the greatest fraudster of the 21st century. Others believe he was a misunderstood visionary, crushed by a system that punishes ambition. Whatever the truth, one fact remains. Julian Mercer never sold an airport. He sold a possibility. And for $242 million. The world bought it. Years passed, but the financial scars remained. The investors who once bragged about their access to a secret mega project had gone silent. Lawsuits were quietly withdrawn. No one wanted their name tied to the fiasco anymore. Corporate reputations were salvaged through hush payments and legal gymnastics. Only a handful dared to speak publicly, and even they hesitated to say Julian Mercer's name on camera. He had become taboo, almost mythical. Not just for the damage he caused, but because of what he revealed about the people who empowered him. In private forums, venture capitalists discussed risk assessment models. Universities used the case in ethics classes. But underneath it all, there was a sense of awe, unspoken but undeniable. Not admiration for the crime itself, but for the scale, the elegance, the precision. Mercer had shown the world that with enough charm, enough story, and just enough mystery, reality itself could be rewritten. There was no grand heist. No dramatic escape through back alleys or safe houses. Only an idea that was so large, so futuristic, so inevitable seeming, that nobody stopped to ask if it was ever real. Even the authorities, after years of chasing shadows, had begun to move on. A few case files remained open. A few agents still monitored leads. But Julian had vanished too cleanly. No security camera ever caught his final departure. No transaction ever traced to his final account. The trail ended with a ghost. He could have been sitting in a penthouse in Buenos Aires, or meditating on a beach in Sri Lanka, or disguised as a tech consultant in Berlin. Or maybe he was gone for good, taken out by someone who wanted their silence bought with more than cash. The mystery only deepened as time went on. And with every year that passed, more people began to suspect they would never know the full truth. Still, the story wouldn't die. Not in the media. Not in whispered conversations among the elite. And not in the minds of those who had once believed. Mercer had touched a nerve buried deep within the global psyche, a craving for something revolutionary, something bigger than life, something too bold to question. That craving hadn't gone away. If anything, it had grown stronger. A decade later, a documentary crew uncovered unused footage of Mercer. Just a few seconds. A private pitch in a Hong Kong hotel. Blurry, off-center, shot on a shaky phone. But in those seconds, he smiled at the room and said, "The future doesn't wait for approval." The clip went viral. Comments poured in. Was it real? Was it AI? Had he resurfaced? The mystery flared again like a wildfire. The legend of Julian Mercer was no longer just a financial scandal. It had become something else. A parable. A warning. A fantasy. A blueprint. In the end, Julian Mercer didn't just con investors or fake an airport. He held up a mirror to the world, and it didn't like what it saw. Long after the financial fallout, the Mercer affair continued to ripple through industries far beyond real estate or finance. Major tech companies began implementing internal protocols, the Mercer clauses, to prevent overhyped pitches from gaining unchecked traction. Risk analysts were trained specifically to identify persuasive deception. Boardrooms, once dazzled by buzzwords and trend-hopping founders, had become wary. The pendulum had swung from blind optimism to guarded skepticism. And still, Mercer's name lurked in the background. Journalists wrote retrospectives. Authors pitched novels based on the events. Hollywood optioned a screenplay. But none of it could capture the strangeness of the real thing, the idea that a man could walk into the most elite circles in the world and sell them air with confidence, then vanish without a trace. There was no dramatic courtroom confession. No mastermind captured in handcuffs. There was only silence, and the questions it left behind. Some said Julian had been a necessary evil, an agent of chaos in a system too rigid to self-correct. Others saw him as a symbol of elite gullibility, the perfect storm of ego, ambition, and unchecked capital. There were even those who believed he had never existed at all. That Julian Mercer was a collective myth born from shared embarrassment. But the paper trails were too real. The empty bank accounts too undeniable. The ghost of his pitch deck still lived in servers across the world. Psychologists and sociologists examined the case as a study in collective belief. How could hundreds of smart, successful individuals, all trained in logic, due diligence, and risk, fall for something with no product, no permits, and no proof? The answer, it seemed, lay not in the scam, but in the people who were scammed. They wanted to believe. They needed to believe. In a post-truth world, Mercer had simply shown them what they were already hungry to see. The missing airport became a symbol. Not of failure, but of ambition. A kind of monument to what people hoped the future might look like, limitless, borderless, frictionless. Mercer had promised to build a gateway to that dream. And in the process, he built something else, a myth that was harder to demolish than any concrete runway. In an odd twist, real developers eventually proposed building an airport in the same region where Mercer claimed his project existed. Investors laughed at first, then paused. The location was ideal. The market had grown. The infrastructure, once a fantasy, was now within reach. Mercer's blueprint, fictional though it was, had planted the seed. Construction began 5 years later. Quietly. Carefully. With real permits. Real engineers. Real oversight. But nobody could ignore the irony. A fake airport had inspired a real one. Mercer had imagined it, and someone else had brought it to life. Years passed. The terminal opened. Flights landed. Tourists snapped selfies beside digital art installations. Somewhere in the crowd, a man watched with quiet amusement. He wore sunglasses and a casual suit. No entourage. No cameras. Just another traveler in a world he helped create, not with bricks, but with belief. A gate attendant called the next boarding group. The man smiled and disappeared into the crowd. Months after the airport opened, a small envelope arrived at the office of a mid-level executive in a Dubai-based investment firm. It contained no return address. Inside was a single item, a postcard. On the front, a stylized sketch of the newly opened airport. On the back, a note written in sharp, elegant handwriting. Some dreams need no runway. No signature. No fingerprints. No trace. The executive froze. The handwriting, though he had only seen it once, on a cocktail napkin a decade ago, was unmistakable. He showed no one. He said nothing. He placed the card in a safe, unsure if he was protecting it. Or hiding it from himself. Rumors spread again. Sightings in Tokyo. A voice recognized at a private seminar in Zurich. A man matching his description photographed at a cryptocurrency convention in Argentina. But nothing concrete. The myth had legs now. It could walk across continents on its own. Interpol reopened a closed file for a brief period. Old agents were pulled from retirement to re-examine the case, but it yielded nothing new. No fingerprints. No financial footprint. No data. Mercer had long since scrubbed himself clean from every system that once documented his ascent. What remained was legend. The story of Julian Mercer was retold in coffee shops and conference panels, in whispered conversations at investment galas and drunken tech meetups. Everyone had a theory. Everyone knew someone who had been in the room. No one could prove a thing. That was perhaps the greatest trick he ever pulled. He didn't just vanish from the physical world. He erased the need for evidence. He made truth optional. Even years later, when the airport was a bustling hub and investors were eager to claim they always knew something was wrong, Mercer was still shaping the conversation. His absence had become more powerful than his presence ever was. He didn't need a legacy of wealth or monuments. His currency was belief. His empire, illusion. Somewhere, if he was still alive, Julian Mercer was watching. Not out of ego. But with quiet satisfaction. Because he had discovered something few ever do, that reality, if pitched the right way, is negotiable. He had proven that a lie wrapped in the promise of progress is not just believable. It is unstoppable. The world never found him. Because they never really wanted to. They wanted what he gave them. A story too good to be questioned. A vision too grand to verify. A future too seductive to resist. And in the end, maybe that was the most dangerous thing of all.